The high-stakes meeting between the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Geneva has not resulted in any major breakthrough over the ongoing Ukraine crisis. However, the two top diplomats have now agreed to keep talking to try to resolve the crisis through negotiations. The two leaders met on Friday in Geneva in a bid to defuse the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The United States has agreed to provide written responses by next week to Russia's demands that the West scale back its military presence in Eastern Europe. Both sides said that Blinken and Lavrov plan to speak again, and they left the door open for another conversation between President Biden and President Putin to try to resolve this crisis.
Around 90 tonnes of US military aid has arrived in Ukraine amid rising tensions with Russia. The lethal aid includes ammunition for frontline defenders and is part of a $280 million security support package approved by US President Joe Biden. Russia says it has no plans to attack Ukraine, despite having 100,000 troops at the border and deploying fighter jets to Ukrainian neighbour Belarus for what is described as joint military drills.
There was a small protest of Afghan citizens in Oslo ahead of the Taliban's visit to the Norwegian capital on Sunday. They're against the delegation meeting with Norwegian authorities and representatives from the international community for talks. It's the first visit to the West since they took control of Kabul in August. Discussions on girls' education and women's rights will be top of the agenda. Since the hardline Islamists took power, girls' education stopped in some parts of the country, but last week they said it should begin again by March.
The so-called Islamic State has launched the largest-scale attack in Syria since it was defeated there in 2019. Their target, a prison holding jihadists in the northeast. And the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces say they've repelled the attackers and recaptured all or most of the inmates who'd escaped in the chaos.
24 hours after the initial onslaught, the neighborhoods around Gweran prison were still a battleground. Conflicting reports of numbers of dead fighters and civilians hung over the city like the plumes of smoke from explosions. Almost 100 suspected IS fighters managed to escape from the prison.
Kazakhstan is holding more than 460 people on terrorism and disorder charges. This comes in the wake of mass unrest which led to deployment of Russia-led forces. The former Soviet Republic has been witnessing unrest over protests against rising fuel prices. There's a clear evidence that the leadership is struggling to meet the demands. However, authorities have blamed bandits and international terror cells for protests. There are 464 suspects who are facing charges related to terrorism and mass disorder. A total of 970 suspects were in custody on charges of theft, disorderly behavior and possession of weapons.
Ethiopia's military is planning to enter Tigray's capital Mekelle and eliminate rebellious forces. That was the message from General Abebo Tadesse late on Friday in an interview with state-affiliated broadcaster Fana.
Mekelle and Tigray are Ethiopian territory. No one will stop us. We will go in and eliminate the enemy. There should not be any confusion about this. The Ethiopian people should not perceive as if the war is over. It is not over.
Hundreds of protesters defied a ban on large gatherings, taking to the streets of Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou. They threw rocks and barricaded roads. Security forces responded with tear gas. The protesters driven into the streets for a number of reasons. fed up with jihadist attacks sweeping the country and angry at the government of President Kabore for shutting down access to social media and the internet after 15 people were arrested for allegedly plotting a coup.
Sheer panic at the races as a fire rips through. The Great Western Cup was called off around 1:30 this afternoon.
Extraordinary scenes. I think first and foremost, hopefully everyone stays safe out there and hopefully they can get the fire under control.
After 18 vehicles went up in flames in the car park. Plumes of toxic smoke filled the sky. The fire quickly spreading to the track, punters forced to flee. Investigators will now look at whether a hot catalytic converter sparked the blaze after the vehicles parked on hay which had been laid on the ground.